Hello, everyone. I'm Kim Fisher, the chair of the Healing Network Initiative here at Holy Cross. The whole point of our team is to educate ourselves and develop awareness and appreciation on a variety of topics that are often hidden once we walk in the doors of the church. In the last few years, we've addressed topics like addiction and mental health. This conversation may be difficult for some people, so if it is, please reach out to any of us on the Healing Network team. On this Veterans Day weekend, we are speaking about trauma, and I'd like to introduce you to Gail and Eric. Gail and Eric, could you please introduce yourselves? And we're going to talk a little bit about a personal introduction and then get into some military service with Gail and Eric.
Thanks, Kim. I'm Gail Sidowitz-Plazik. I have been a member of Holy Cross for about 17 years. I have been married for 27 years and have a 22-year-old son and a 19-year-old daughter. I am involved in the Healing Network here at Holy Cross and also Care and Community team. And I am still a Sunday school teacher. I actually teach Eric's two youngest beautiful daughters, and I'm still involved in Vacation Bible School. I am a school psychologist in the West Dallas School District, and I'm starting my 28th year.
Thank you so very much, Gail.
Yeah, so Eric Rausch, and thank you, Gail, publicly for teaching my daughters. So I'm a psychologist. I work with veterans. I've been doing so for the last 10 years or so, some in school and now professionally. I have 4 kids, born and raised in Milwaukee, live in Brookfield now. And yeah, I've in the Army, and we'll get into a little bit more detail, but for the last 17 years, still serving.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Gail, could you tell us a little bit about your military service, please?
Sure, and I had shared, I think I was in the military probably prior to Eric being born. But I joined in 1988. I was 20 years old and was running out of money to go to college, and had always wanted to see if I could make it through basic training. And so I joined the Army Reserves and was a lab tech, and was a wonderful experience, very challenging, but also very rewarding. I was deployed for Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and went with a unit out of Madison to Germany, where I was working in a hospital, and then I volunteered to go to another little city called Parmesans, where I drove a forklift in a warehouse. So, and I had been deployed for about 5 months, and I finished a 6-year stint plus 2 years inactive.
Thank you so much for your service. Thank you.
Yeah, so my journey started, my dad was in the military growing up. My brother went to West Point, so I was kind of groomed for this a little bit. Went to Marquette ROTC, graduated and commissioned as an armor officer.
Wow.
So served active duty for 4.5 years, deployment to Iraq at the time. And that's actually when I decided to get into mental health, because during that deployment, there was soldiers who were kind of shells of human beings. They were on their 3rd deployment in 5 years. And I thought, well, 1, I don't want to go down that road, and 2, I want to help. So at that point, I decided to go and become a psychologist, got into grad school, joined the reserves, and I've been in the reserves ever since then. And now I'm serving as a psychologist in the reserves. And I was gone last year for deployment to Honduras, so you may have not seen me around for a while.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you, Eric.
service. Thank you.
You as well, Gail.
Mhm. So, why talk about this in a sermon? Don't we hear enough about this on the news? Why here? And Pastor Meredith has said that maybe we can be the answer to someone's prayer. Maybe knowing a little more can help us to be better listeners and have more understanding rather than the attitude, well, that happened years ago, just try to get over it. So I'm going to ask Gail and Eric, respectively, how would you describe trauma and maybe help us to understand it a little bit better? Gail.
Kim, I really understand trauma to be an occurrence in someone's life that really causes an emotional distress and response. It's a very heterogeneous term, I think, trauma. People can be witnesses to the same events or same occurrences and have very different responses. As Eric will talk more, there's different types of trauma in the response, and we also know that according to a person's age or their developmental stage, they can process trauma very, very differently. I think the most important thing for us to remember when we're thinking about trauma is not asking someone what happened to you. I'm sorry, not what's wrong with you, but rather what happened to you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think looking at trauma, we talk about like big traumas, little traumas. So
Right.
there's some that are more obvious that everyone realizes is a trauma, but there's a lot of more invisible or small traumas that add up. there's three, as a psychologist working with vets and first responders, there's three main trauma injuries. One of them is this fear-based PTSD, where your body kind of gets amped up, and that's more known in the community. Like the startle response, the fireworks, it's very visible.
Yeah.
A lesser known one is called a moral injury, and this is really more of an injury to the soul. And they're really starting to understand this in about the last 10 years. So a little bit of what makes a moral injury is doing something that you regret, or that you did that you regret, or you failed to do something that you regret. So obviously with veterans, it could be taking a life. So that's why this was first studied with veterans. But it also could be not helping your buddy as they're getting bullied. It could be yelling at your kid. It could be any kind of thing. So veterans don't corner the market on trauma. Secondly, it's this just being around a lot of suffering. So once you can see this in war, but also EMS workers or people who work in the Justice Department seeing kids get split up, or secondary trauma from counselors hearing stories, or just being a good friend. So when you're around enough of this suffering, you kind of go numb. So that's a lot of what we see with, and it goes into a lot of like other stuff. If you're numb, risky behavior, drinking, other things. And then this last way of moral injury is a sense of betrayal. And you can get betrayal from different levels. You can get it from authority figures like parents, priests, coaches, bosses, leaders. You can get it from peers like siblings, coworkers. You could also get it from institutions. And I think that's one of the things we'll talk about is from Vietnam veterans got it from society. It could be from government, it could be from the military, it can be from the church or the school or the neighborhood. So all these things make up this invisible wound, and that betrayal really leads to rage. So we're trying to understand this more to allow the healing progression. That's one of the points of understanding trauma, is if you understand it, you can kind of start the healing process. Burying it just preserves it, and it'll come out in all sorts of ways.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, there's no age limit to experiencing trauma. What may happen when people don't deal with their trauma?
Oh, I think as Eric has touched upon, we can see a lot of different responses from, somebody could become very withdrawn, or as Eric said, we might see that rage piece. If someone isn't feeling validated about their trauma, or as Eric had indicated too, they're feeling maybe guilt, shame around that, and then they're getting a message from the places and the people that they trust that their trauma isn't valid, can be pretty significant. We've talked about there can be kind of an understanding out there that, you need to deal with this, it happened in the past, move forward. And a lot of that, as Eric said, that stays with you. And it doesn't go away. It eventually is going to rear its ugly head in some form.
There's a phrase, time heals all wounds. It is not accurate, okay? I've worked with many people who've had traumas, sealed for 40, 50 years, and they were waiting until the factory closed, retirement, an injury. When you're driving or showering or your guard is down, they will come up. It's amazing. It knows no time.
Right.
So it does take time to help heal wounds, but just doing nothing will not heal it. So it does, I try to simplify mental health a lot by not chasing all the symptoms, okay? So there's this panic, or this is anxiety, or there's this. A lot of the source of that is trauma. So if you can find that and treat it, there's a lot of those symptoms that go away, especially with like substance use, right? So literally any kind of dysfunction, or when people are confused why you or someone else is acting in a way or so activated, there's usually some sort of trauma that's being triggered, whether we realize it or not. And often we don't realize it.
And we also know, and research has shown us, trauma has effect on the physical part of you. So in young children, it can change brain pathways, just the way that they're able to form new learning. We know physically as adults, right, trauma can show up in aches and pains and other types of things as well. So it does make sure that it is known, whether we're trying to let it be at the forefront or not.
Yes. I wanted to ask both of you, how does faith make a difference in dealing with trauma? Could you say a few words on that?
I'll start with that. A lot of people who experience trauma lose faith. So when we talk about moral injury, it's a very common. They look at moral injury as like a syndrome now. So there's no one cause, but there's a lot of things known. So substance use issues with suicide, and losing faith is so common. When you see a lot of suffering and you've been around and you feel this guilt, you might feel like a monster, you're unforgivable, it makes sense to lose faith. So faith can be the cause of some traumas, as we've mentioned with like really bad, historical events, right?
Yes.
So faith can also be a real source of healing. A lot of people who feel helpless surrender, get some forgiveness, find some sort of a safe place to start the healing process. So faith is the cause and partly solution to dealing with trauma. It's not the only tool. It is a very important tool, though.
Very good. Thank you.
And I would agree, and I do think people can lose faith or ask God, why would you allow this to happen? And where are you in
Yes.
some of these horrific situations that people have faced? But also for us to help these people and ourselves to understand God is there, right? And that's what part of faith is. We know that there's no promise that we're going to have a great life. And at those times is when we really lean on God and we look to see where God's hands are in some of that mess that we might be going through. And we as a church to help our members and our community to know that they can still lean on God during those really, really tough times.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. A lot of people say prayer is important, but you sometimes feel you just can't pray the situation away. And so there's a very big shortage of counselors and psychologists these days. Any ideas of how people can find resources for dealing with some
Yeah.
of the trauma?
It's a tough question to answer because there are resources. Some of them are hard to get to.
Right.
But really, what I look at this as a more zoom out lens for this. To really start dealing with trauma, you have to feel safer. Now, some people will say, I don't feel safe or I don't trust anybody. I try not to look at it as like a yes or no. Some people are more safe, some places are more safe, some people you can trust more. So find those places and people you can trust and feel safer with and really start the process. So sometimes that is just a relationship with God or a pastor or a person or a professional helper. And again, these teachers that can help us with certain skills like acceptance and forgiveness and compassion, these are tools that really help somebody heal trauma. It's not just a magic pill or something
Right.
else. And it's really yeoman's kind of steady work. You can't just do it in one fell swoop. So I would say, we have resources available, and I think
Yes.
we can close with that, what the
Yes.
Healing Network does. If we rattled off a list of 30, you would all forget it anyways. But we have more help available than we realize. It doesn't always have to be professional, and professional help is there if
Yes.
needed.
Yep, and I think, Eric, that was really well said. Please, we would encourage people reach out to your church, your primary physicians, your schools. There's a lot of institutions, like Eric said, there's a lot of different resources. It changes pretty frequently, but know that there is help available and there's people that would be able to help you facilitate getting into a program.
Absolutely. Please know that all of us on the Healing Network team are available. You can reach out to any of us at any time. We do have resources on our bulletin board out by the gathering place, but we also have some materials, each one of us on the team. So if you were to email or give us a call, we can definitely set you up with some resources and just be a sounding board for different things that are going on. Of course, our pastors are always available, but when they're not and other hands are needed, please know that the Healing Network is here to serve you. And we very much care about you and would love to hear from you anytime you need to reach out. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Gail,
Thanks, Kim.
very, very
Thanks, Eric.
much for your time, and thank you again.
Timing's almost perfect.
Was it?
Yeah,
I
it was
couldn't see
14.
it. Okay, great. Good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't think I wrapped it up perfectly, but I hope that's
don't be
okay.
too
You
hard
guys
on
were
yourself.
amazing. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, it was really
Aw,
good.
Good.
It was
You're thinking